Among my favorite filmmakers are the Coen brothers, who have built an impressive filmography that manages to dig into the strange worlds inhabited by their characters and the topsy-turvy directions their journeys take them. Joel and Ethan Coen have a way of finding humor out of the darkest scenarios in their comedies and finding the necessary drama in the more serious films. You never know what kind of movie you'll get from them next, so there's often a lot of excitement about what they're working on. If there's a common theme that seems to run through their movies, it's about how a decision, often from greed or malice or even pure innocence, can set off a wild chain of events. My favorite Coen brothers movie, Fargo, is a perfect example of this. Every little horrific event that happens in the movie is because of the selfish actions of a car salesman who just wants money and is willing to let his wife get kidnapped to make that possible. Where the Coens take the story is completely wild and showcases their ability of writing hilarious conversations between characters, often about the most outlandish things, like arguing over a parking fee or the strangely casual way two police officers discuss a murder. All of these characters become fleshed out and interesting because of those little moments. It's just wonderful seeing the plot unravel and how things go from bad to worse with this kidnapping. People tend to get frustrated when characters don't act logically, but the beauty of a lot of Coen movies is that their characters are generally paranoid and don't think clearly about the choices they make. However, everything that happens feels like a natural progression of those consequences and don't come across as contrived. Fargo would not be nearly as entertaining if the criminals did not immediately resort to murder as the next illogical step. In fact, there would not even be a plot if Jerry Lundegaard just stopped and realized how insane and dangerous the scheme is. Another one of the Coens' best movies is The Big Lebowski, which also takes its story to so many unexpected places. It all starts with a case of mistaken identity and a rug that's been urinated on, and then the Coens manage to work bowling, a toe, nihilists, and a pornographic film producer in a story heavily inspired by classic detective novels. And all of this involving the most casual protagonist imaginable, roped into a complex missing person tale. Their movies seem to exist in a world all their own, and I feel that also adds to the appeal of their work. I think the most underrated Coen brothers movie is The Hudsucker Proxy, which is an homage to the films of Frank Capra and Howard Hawks, and takes place in this fantastic Art Deco world. It's a wonderfully imaginative film that was underappreciated on its original release, but has grown a more appreciative audience over time. It's so funny and does well in depicting this simple, innocent soul gets sucked into the corporate world. The Coens are also excellent at balancing the goofiness of their characters and the actors' performances with the oddball nature of their stories. So much of the humor in O Brother, Where Art Thou comes from the way Ulysses fancies himself as a sophisticated man among the southern populace, but his intelligence is not that much higher than those he comes across. Raising Arizona is among their wildest comedies, with so many laughs coming for the personalities of Nicolas Cage's robber and Holly Hunter's policewoman who he marries. Burn After Reading is full of these goofy characters, each one more ridiculous and strange than the last. Whether it's Brad Pitt's dim-witted gym employee, George Clooney's super paranoid marshal, or John Malkovich's frustrated CIA analyst tired of everyone's nonsense, all of them view the world through this bizarre lens that the Coens somehow weave into this spy thriller. Burn After Reading also has a moment, like so many Coen brothers movies, which is so completely shocking and yet also absolutely hilarious you'll never forget it. They're always so good at tapping into the thoughts that run through their characters' heads and the uncertainty of everything thrown their way. One of my other favorite Coen movies is Barton Fink, which is about a playwright who moves to Hollywood and tries to write a wrestling picture for a big studio. He is constantly pulled in every direction while trying to write the script and struggles with dealing with a boisterous neighbor at his hotel or the movie studio mogul who goes from wanting that Barton Fink feeling to getting sick of him. A Serious Man similarly puts its main character through unusual circumstances beyond his control as he tries to make sense of everything and what sign the universe seems to be sending him. That movie is also an example of how the Coens put a lot of their own history into their films, with A Serious Man being set in the same Minnesota city that the Coens grew up in the 50s and 60s, and putting particular emphasis on Larry Gopnik's Judaism. I've primarily talked about their comedies, but they can tackle dramatic stories with a lot of depth too. No Country for Old Men grapples with violence with the required intensity as it pushes the audience into their version of Texas. This one particularly uses sound to great effect as the characters look for one another, and there is this uneasy feeling throughout that something bad is going to happen. The Coens seem to have a particular fascination with crime stories going as far back as their feature directing debut, Blood Simple. They have this ability of mixing what they've learned from classic cinema and applying them to their own stories, like The Man Who Wasn't There and its black and white depiction of 1949, calling to mind movies of the era about people pull off elaborate schemes in regular towns. It never feels like they're copying the classic Hollywood filmmakers, though, just learning from them. Most of their movies are original, but they have done adaptations too. O Brother, Where Art Thou cleverly takes Homer's The Odyssey and places it in the Deep South during the Great Depression, and comes up with a lot of clever ways to use the elements from that story in this new time and setting. True Grit adapts Charles Portis's novel and took the Western to interesting new places in its depiction of the time period and the emotional journey taken by Mattie Ross and Rooster Cogburn. And in the anthology film, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, my favorite segment was Old Gold Canyon, which was based on a Jack London story. It was able to make me invested in its tale of a prospector looking for gold and highlights their ability at giving us charming characters in addition to more menacing and deceitful ones. They even try their hand at a remake with The Ladykillers, which a lot of people consider one of their weakest films, but I disagree. I think this is a hilarious movie that successfully replaced the British setting of the original with Mississippi. The original Ladykillers has a lot of themes common in the Coens' work, so it's understandable why they would want to do their own take, and they managed to inject it with their brand of humor. They particularly have fun with showing how these criminals are thrown off by this elderly woman and depicts each step in their plan going wrong to great effect. What's wonderful about the Coens is even with the connecting elements of their movies, they always seek to try new things, particularly with the look of their films. While they frequently collaborated with cinematographers like Barry Sonnenfeld, Roger Deakins, and Bruno Delbonnel, they make sure the visual appearances of the movies are specific to that one. So Barton Fink does not look like Fargo, which does not look like The Big Lebowski, which does not look like Oh Brother, even though Deakins shot all of them and they were made in the same 10-year span. They make their settings look appropriately distinct, with some films, like No Country for Old Men and True Grit, going for something naturalistic, while The Hudsucker Proxy and Hail Caesar emphasize the lavish artificiality of their settings. Another thing that stands out to me about the movies is how they often reward repeat viewings. I remember the first time I watched Fargo, I really liked it, but I did not necessarily call it one of my favorites. However, I would frequently return to it and find new brilliant details in the storytelling and direction and performances that made me love it more and more, and I now consider it a masterpiece. The same thing happened with The Big Lebowski. I thought it was a funny and enjoyable movie on the first viewing, but I find new hilarious things and appreciate even more the brilliant ideas the Coens place within the story and their characters whenever I return to it. It's now long been one of my favorite comedies, and there are always new aspects I love about it every time I pop it back in. My journey with Inside Llewyn Davis was especially interesting. When I saw it in the theater, I was underwhelmed, as I did not think the main character was all that compelling and did not find myself that invested in his predicaments. However, considering my past history with the Coens' work, I knew I would give it another look eventually. A few months later, I watched it again and admired it a bit more, but still did not love it. A short while ago, I revisited Inside Llewyn Davis and could not believe I struggled with it the first time. Llewyn was a fascinating and multi-layered character, several of the episodes were hilarious, and the ultimate journey taken by him was equal parts sad, funny, and poignant. So if you were iffy on a Coen Brothers movie on the first watch, it's a good idea to give it another chance. The one Coen movie that I still find does not entirely gel together as a whole is Intolerable Cruelty. Although it certainly has its moments and is a noble effort at doing a modern screwball comedy, I don't think it's nearly as sharp as it could have been. This movie is notably the rare film of theirs that did not originate with them. They were initially hired as script doctors, and then it got passed around from one writer to another before ending up back with the Coens, who eventually decided to direct. So maybe that's one reason it's not as consistently funny as that other films. It is interesting looking at the films they have a writing credit on, but did not direct. They were brought in to do some punch-ups on the screenplay for Bridge of Spies, and you can definitely spot traces of that voice in the scenes where Tom Hanks' character is in the Soviet Union. Suburbicon, which the Coens originally wrote in the 80s, would end up being directed by George Clooney, who combined their script with a different unrelated script, and it's clear which part of the film was their story. Most confusing is their writing credit on the World War II movie Unbroken. It's difficult to tell what their contributions to that script were, as nothing about the dialogue brings to mind their usual work. A few years ago, the Coens made the surprising choice to direct separate projects. They were not breaking up, but instead were just inspired to tell different stories. Joe Coen directed the tragedy Macbeth, an adaptation of the William Shakespeare play. While the dialogue is taken directly from the play without any alterations to the bard's words, it makes sense why it would appeal to Coen. It is, after all, about a couple people who plot a scheme, and we see the eventual fallout from that, including the mental effect on Macbeth. The cast was filled with quirky and oddball characters like you would see in the brothers' other films. Meanwhile, Ethan Coen directed Dragway Dolls, a wacky comedy with events escalating as characters pursue an important plot device, and criminals, politicians, and lesbians get roped into the whole ordeal. I enjoyed both of these solo projects, and they do provide a potential peek into their specific creative visions after decades of being seemingly joined at the hip. However, the Coens themselves have said they will absolutely work together again in the future. Whatever the next movie ends up being, I'll definitely look forward to it. Joel and Ethan Coen have managed to establish their own unique voice, and I consider their run of movies from the 90s to the early 2000s to be particularly impressive, with one widely entertaining and rewatchable film after another. Whether it's a story of murder, greed, paranoia, or stupid characters just messing around and getting to unusual hijinks, they often know how to make something unforgettable and timeless. See you next time.